Hey, what's goody, Frye gang? Now, on May 28th, 2015, the very first Splatoon game was released. Although it had a very divisive release, it was ultimately critically acclaimed. 2 years later, on July 21st, 2017, the sequel dropped to even more of a success, and finally, as of recently, September 9th, 2022 marks the release of Splatoon 3, doing even better than Splatoon 2, with each game doing better than the last in release. But what makes Splatoon so appealing and successful? What makes it stand out from Nintendo's other IPs that draw in so many people to this series? Now, before talking about the game itself, I think it is important to mention the genre that Splatoon is a part of, since that is a very big reason why Splatoon is so successful in the first place. For all intents and purposes, Splatoon is the first and currently only shooter that Nintendo has developed themselves and published. Obviously, there was GoldenEye 007 back in 1997 for the N64, developed by Rare, but that was already based off of a known IP and based off of the James Bond movie. So Splatoon is the first brand new IP by Nintendo in the shooter genre. Contrary to what you might believe, this is actually a pretty big deal, as Nintendo and just overall Japanese developers in general don't really dabble in the shooter genre all that much. Most of the big names of the shooter genre are Western or non-Japan based, which makes sense as the West typically likes to romanticize warfare and things like that. So we have Call of Duty, which was published by Activision based in America. There is also Rainbow Six, which is published by Ubisoft based in France, and as well as Battlefield, also based in the US, published by EA or Electronic Arts. And all of the examples I had just mentioned are all first-person shooters, with Japan isn't really as fond of them as, say, the Western is. First-person shooter genre is typically a Western thing, a predominantly Western thing, so the majority of Japan doesn't really care for them or is interested in them. And that's another difference, is that Splatoon is a third-person shooter over first-person. Now, while there are many other different third-person shooters and even Japanese FPSs, Splatoon seems to be one of the more popular third-person shooters, especially based from Japan. And the opposite is also true for Splatoon. Just like how FPSs are more popular in the West and not that popular in Japan, Splatoon is most popular in Japan and not nearly as much in the West. Now, that's not to say over here in the West doesn't like Splatoon or it's not popular here. It's just a lot more popular in Japan. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the culture and cross genres like that. I want to specifically focus on Splatoon itself, and within the general topic of Nintendo and why Splatoon is so prevalent and so popular within Nintendo fans, since that is the majority of the people who are going to be playing Splatoon are those who are fans of Nintendo. And my first point has to do with what I had said earlier. Splatoon, as of right now, is really the only real shooter out of Nintendo's entire catalog. If you look at their biggest IPs, most of them are JRPGs or platformers, with Mario and Kirby are typically platformers, and then The Legend of Zelda, Fire Emblem, those are JRPGs. Pokemon is also an RPG, but that's less Nintendo, although they do own some rights to it. The overwhelming majority of Nintendo's biggest IPs are platformers, JRPGs, or just overall non-shooters. The closest we got to a shooter was Star Fox, and even then that's more like space dogfighting, so that's not really a comparison, but it's the closest that we've gotten. So naturally, when Nintendo announces a brand new IP for a genre they more or less never had a game in, it is going to drum up some interest as to see what Nintendo can do, since they never really tackled the genre before. People are interested on how it'll turn out. And while the majority of Nintendo fans aren't into shooters, as Nintendo is more geared towards children, that does not mean only children play Nintendo. That is just their main demographic. Most children aren't into shooters until they get around their teenage years, which the target demographic for Nintendo seems to be a little bit under that. So the majority of people or Nintendo fans aren't into shooters, but those who are, they've been patiently waiting. Nintendo never really made any shooters. Here comes Splatoon, so those, as well as the children, as Splatoon is also a very big appeal to children, will be interested in it. So just from the very idea of Splatoon alone is just going to get a lot of eyes on it. And what helps Splatoon stand out as a third-person shooter game compared to whatever else Nintendo could have done is the very premise of Splatoon itself, okay? Compared to other shooters, Splatoon is very, very unique. All right, I know I said I don't want to compare it too much to other shooters, but you kind of have to in a conversation like this. But most of the other shooters, like Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, Rainbow, Battlefield, Valorant, a bunch of other games like that, those are typically your generic modern warfare type of games. That's what you'd expect war to look like. All right, it's a bunch of soldiers going out and fighting in wars, basically the premise. Splatoon is different. First, they're not even human characters. These are squids who can kind of morph into kids, and they use a bunch of different human remnants, let's say technology from humans. So we have like plastic guns, like toy water guns with like the Splattershot Juniors, all the way to like gas pumps with the E-liter, gas canisters with explosives. All right, the weapons themselves are already very diverse and aren't just your typical guns and firearms that you'd see in these other shooters. They're all very playful, I guess is the correct word to say. They're all based on very different things throughout human society. Really anything can be turned into a Splatoon weapon, so there's already appeal there. And like I said, we're playing as squids who can transform into kids. Where else have you heard an idea like that, especially for a shooter? Or most shooters are just humans, but here this is vastly different from everything else we've seen. And the main premise of turning into a squid to swim in your own ink that you shoot out of your weapon as the main movement option is also very unique. Most shooter games, you would just sprint or use some type of vehicle or something to get around the map. In Splatoon, you literally use your own ink, the ammo from your weapon, to swim in to move faster. There's nothing really out there like that makes Splatoon quite unique, just on the very basic things that it does, like the weapons, the movements, the characters themselves. Arguably, the biggest appeal to Splatoon is its environment and theme itself. Now, Splatoon has a more carefree and fantastical feel and just overall atmosphere to it compared to other shooters. This naturally would make it appealing to a lot more people, both children and adults. Like I said, with the more conventional shooters, those more are geared to late teens to adults, while Splatoon appeals to relatively all age groups. Really anyone can get interested in Splatoon. Younger kids aren't really going to be that interested in the conventional first-person shooters, but Splatoon would be a very big interest of theirs. So naturally, there's just a larger group of people that could be interested in Splatoon compared to other shooters. And not to mention, Splatoon is a very, very colorful game. It's a colorful and loud game, if that makes sense. The colors are very apparent and bright and in your face, which small children do tend to like, and even adults. All right, adults are obviously interested in Splatoon and the atmosphere of it, as there are many competitive teams for Splatoon, and just adults who stream the game and just overall enjoy playing the game. So it really does appeal to most people, just a large group of people. But children are a huge demographic for video games in general, since they're mainly the main age group that are playing it more than anyone. So if you can appeal to them, you can really appeal to anybody. And with everything about it appealing on a surface level, it's the deeper and finer details of Splatoon that keep you hooked once you're already there and interested. For example, the characters. Alright, the characters in this series, they're all just a bunch of inklings and octolings obsessed with fashion, just playing it out in turf war. Alright, that's the most broad look at it. And that's kind of adorable. There's not really any serious tones or dark story to be told there like other shooters that appeal to an older age group. The overall story and just characters of Splatoon can appeal to really anybody, like I've been saying multiple times, because it's true. Splatoon really does just appeal to a larger age group than most conventional shooters do. And speaking of characters, although there aren't as many big, important, very fleshed out characters as some other series, the characters that we do spend a lot of time with are very full of character and personality, and you can really grow to love them. Every character, for example, the idols, every idol is different from each other with their own personality and theming and aesthetic and everything going on. You really can't help but love a lot of these characters, and even for the ones that you don't like, it's hard to say that they're bad characters or are written poorly. And I've already talked about the music of Splatoon in a separate video here that I'll have linked in the description, going over what makes Splatoon music so appealing, as the music of Splatoon is one of, if not the biggest talking points of the series. It's one of its greatest strengths, and there are many reasons as for that. So you can go watch the video on that if you want to find out about the music. I'm not going to go in depth about it here, but there is one other thing that I do want to mention that kind of ties back to the whole character point I was just making. And again, I'm going to hand that off to the GOAT Scruffy.
All this music may be loud, bold, and booyah, but it's also personable. Most game soundtracks are non-diegetic and non-canonical, meaning they exist outside the physical game environment and do not have any effect on the story. Splatoon's soundtrack is non-diegetic, but it does exist within the lore of Splatoon, as a band of characters playing it. That makes the soundtrack into a character of sorts itself, cheering you on in gameplay and changing, even maturing over time, with the advancing tide of culture.
This just gives the music, and by extension the characters who perform that music, even more of an identity and personality. So once you've already were drawn in by all of the things on the surface from Splatoon, once you're actually already into the series, it's these little things like the music and the characters and the canonicity of the music in the game just really grips you tighter and keeps you grounded in this series. Hard to let it go. All right, there's not really a time that goes by where I don't think about Splatoon or reference it in certain ways. Splatoon is just a fresh take on the shooter genre. As someone who isn't a fan of shooters in general myself, I find Splatoon to be very different and very fun. I like Splatoon a lot, if you couldn't already tell by the YouTube channel. Splatoon is one of my favorite Nintendo series, right? And this is more of like a me personal thing, as I'm just more into Japanese culture in general, with JRPG being my favorite video game genre. So I'm more geared to games inspired by Japanese culture. And Splatoon is very big on that. Splatoon is a series that I recommend everybody plays, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. Splatoon has kind of cemented itself in the shooter genre, although a lot of people like to disregard Nintendo. A lot of non-Nintendo fans like to disregard Nintendo because, oh, they're just the company that makes games for kids. But we see how popular and successful Nintendo has gotten, all right? Even if they do just make games for kids, they're wildly successful, all right? So you can't really knock them for that. They targeted a demographic and they're excelling at that. So that shouldn't really be a negative at all, since, you know, adults also play Nintendo games. So that's already another point that's not really even relevant. Mini petty rant aside, Splatoon has cemented itself in the shooter genre and has made a name for itself. Splatoon is here to stay. Okay, it's just been getting more and more popular with every new release, and I can see Splatoon going on for a long time, staying up there competing with some of the giants like Call of Duty and Battlefield and all that. Splatoon will not be ending anytime soon, and I'm just even more excited to see what Splatoon has next. Side Order is coming out in a couple months, so I'm very excited about that. But other than that, that's really about it. Combo video is coming, I know. I keep saying that, but it hasn't dropped yet. It will drop. Alright, Combo video will be dropping before Side Order. I can at least guarantee that. But with that, stay safe. See you next mission and play some goddamn Splatty.